Trapped by my husband in prison for 2 years because of his mistress, watch how I got my revenge and turned them into homeless drifters on the very day of my release. The cell walls were damp, smelling of a mixture of old concrete, dried sweat, and rotting hope. Yet for Zariah, that wall was a giant calendar. With the tip of her thumbnail, rough and slightly chipped, she traced a small vertical line near the leg of her iron cot. The line was almost invisible if you didn't look closely, but for Zariah, it was a tiny sign of victory. 729 days. Tomorrow would be day 730, the day of her release. Zariah took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the stale air of the women's correctional facility. She sat cross-legged on the thin mattress that had been her home for the last 2 years. Before this, she slept in a king-sized bed with Egyptian cotton sheets, in a luxurious villa in Silver Lake Estates, the most exclusive black neighborhood in the city. Before, she was the wife of Cyprian Mercer, an up-and-coming real estate mogul. Now, she was just inmate number 304. The memory washed over her like an unstoppable tide. The flashes of the reporters' cameras at the courthouse, the condescending look of the judge. And there on the witness stand, Cyprian, sitting with a crisp white shirt impeccably rolled up, his face tilted in perfectly feigned sorrow. "I loved my wife, Your Honor." Cyprian's voice had trembled then, a performance worthy of an Oscar. "But I cannot justify her actions. She pushed Azura out of jealousy. She killed our future child." Then there was Azura, Cyprian's personal assistant and mistress, sitting in a wheelchair. Her pale face, free of makeup, deliberately styled to look pitiful as she clutched her flat stomach. Crocodile tears rolled down her cheeks as she pointed a trembling finger at Zariah. Mrs. Vance screamed that I was a whore. Then she pushed me down the stairs. I felt the blood flowing. Lies. It was all a lie. That day, Zariah had indeed gone to Cyprian's office to demand an explanation for the infidelity she had discovered, but she never touched Azura. It was Azura who had hysterically stepped back and slipped, or perhaps threw herself on purpose, down the emergency stairwell, which was covered by only one security camera. The footage from that camera strangely became corrupted during the crucial minutes, leaving only the image of Zariah at the top of the stairs with an enraged face. 2 years. A felony conviction for aggravated assault resulting in the death of a fetus. When the judge's gavel struck, Zariah's world collapsed. She saw Cyprian hug Azura, comforting that viper. But in that embrace, Zariah caught a split second where Cyprian looked at her. Not with guilt, but with a cold, calculating gaze. The look of someone who had just eliminated the only obstacle to a multi-million-dollar inheritance. "Zariah, you daydreaming again?" A raspy voice snapped her out of her trance. It was Ophelia, her cellmate, an older woman imprisoned for a pyramid scheme. Zariah turned with a neutral expression. During these 2 years, she had learned to shut off her emotions. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in this place. "Just counting, Ophelia," Zariah replied quietly. "Tomorrow you walk free. If I were you, I'd be thanking the Lord until I had a bump on my forehead." Ophelia laughed as she folded her inmate uniform. "But you're strange, Zari. You're too calm, like someone going grocery shopping, not someone walking out of hell." Zariah sketched a faint smile, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Because the real hell isn't here, Ophelia. The real hell is out there waiting for me." Zariah stood up, smoothing her blanket. "And this time I'll be the one holding the fire." 10:00 a.m., visitation hours. The sound of the correctional officer's heavy boots echoed down the block's hallway. Normally, this was the time inmates anticipated the most. The hope of receiving a package from a relative, or simply seeing their children's faces. But for Zariah, this hour was a test of patience. "Zariah Vance, you have a visitor!" The officer, a burly woman, shouted from the other side of the bars. Zariah didn't move from her position, reading a book in the corner of the cell. She didn't even lift her head. "Who?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. "Who do you think? Your faithful husband and his young lady, the officer sneered. Despite her toughness, the woman felt a certain sympathy for Zariah. The whole prison knew how diligent Cyprian and Azura were with their visits. To an outsider, it looked like an act of responsibility and forgiveness, but the officers who often watched their interactions knew something didn't add up. "Tell them I'm sick, or dead, whatever," Zariah replied coldly, turning the page of her book. "Zari," whispered Ophelia, "it's the last month. Tomorrow, you leave. Why not see them one last time? Maybe they brought some money." Zariah slammed the book shut. "I don't need their money, Ophelia. Besides, they don't come to give. They come to take." The officer sighed. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Mercer says it's urgent. He says it's about your late parents' assets that are going to be seized if you don't sign today. He's brought a notary." Zariah laughed. A dry, cutting sound. "Tell the Honorable Mr. Mercer," Zariah said, staring intently at the officer, "that my hands are cramped. I haven't been able to hold a pen in 2 years because I've been too busy scrubbing inmates' laundry. If my father's assets are seized, so be it. Let it all burn." The officer shook her head, surrendering. "You are incredibly stubborn. All right. I'll tell him you refuse to see them again." When the officer left, Zariah leaned her back against the cold wall. Her heart was pounding, not from fear, but from contained rage. Every month, for 24 months, Cyprian and Azura had come. At first, they arrived with sweetness, bringing good food, pretending to want reconciliation. Cyprian claimed he was forced to press charges due to public pressure and Azura's family, but Zariah knew that a week after her imprisonment, Cyprian tried to liquidate a fixed-term deposit in Zariah's father's name worth $3 million. The bank refused because it needed Zariah's signature as the sole heir. From that moment on, their visits turned into psychological terror. Cyprian begged, then threatened. Azura cried, then mocked. They needed that signature. Cyprian's business empire, which looked magnificent, was actually rotting from the inside. His main capital had always come from fund injections from Zariah's father. Without Zariah, Cyprian was nothing more than the captain of a sinking ship. "Just wait," Zariah whispered to the void. "You won't have my signature, you'll have me." In the air-conditioned visitation room, Cyprian Mercer loosened his tie abruptly. Cold sweat beaded on his temples. "She refused again?" Cyprian asked, almost shouting, when the officer returned alone. The officer nodded indifferently. "She says her hands are cramped, sir. She can't sign." "That crazy woman!" Azura, sitting next to Cyprian, slammed her Hermes bag onto the table. "She's doing it on purpose. She knows the company audit starts tomorrow. If we can't liquidate her father's trust fund today to cover the hole in the balance sheet, we are finished." Cyprian massaged the bridge of his nose, which was throbbing. His face, usually handsome, now looked older than his 35 years. The last 2 years had been a logistical nightmare for him. He thought getting rid of Zariah would make things easier. Zariah was a homebody, submissive, or so he believed. He thought throwing her in prison would break her spirit, making her sign anything in exchange for early release or better conditions. But the Zariah in prison had turned into a rock. She refused sentence reductions, refused privileges, and worst of all, refused to yield power over the assets of her father, Reginald Vance. Even though Cyprian already controlled the operations of his father-in-law's company, without legal ownership of the shares, he couldn't leverage the vital assets to get new loans. "Calm down, Azura. Don't shout here," Cyprian hissed. "You asked me to calm down? Are you kidding me?" Azura glared at him, her beautiful face distorted by panic. "The developers of the Skyview project are already claiming the third payment. If we don't pay next week, the project halts, and the media will smell the carrion. Cyprian, and remember, tomorrow she walks free." Those words hung in the air like poison. Tomorrow she walks free. "So, what if she walks free?" Cyprian tried to sound confident, though his heart wavered. She's just an ex-con. Who's going to believe her? Her reputation is destroyed. The label of baby killer will haunt her forever. We'll pick her up tomorrow. We'll take her home, lock her up. We'll pump her full of sedatives until she signs. Are you sure? Azura looked at him doubtfully. She's been silent for 2 years, Cyprian. Her silence is scary. She's never made a scene. She's never begged. She simply refused. She has no one, Azura. Her father is dead. Her fortune is blocked. Her high society friends have abandoned her. She'll walk out of here destitute if we don't take her in. Cyprian struggled to convince himself. Cyprian stood up, adjusting his jacket. Let's go home. Let's prepare the script for tomorrow. Call the journalists. We'll create the narrative that we are a compassionate family welcoming back the wayward wife. That way, if she tries anything, the public will think she's ungrateful. Azura huffed but followed Cyprian. As they walked toward the black Cadillac awaiting them, they didn't realize that their seemingly perfect plan was hanging by a very thin thread about to snap. Night fell over the prison, bringing a chill that soaked into the bones. In the small library, rarely visited by other inmates, Zoraya sat opposite an older woman with short white hair. It was Octavia Graves, a famous former attorney imprisoned 5 years ago, used as a scapegoat in a corruption case involving a high-ranking official. Octavia was Zoraya's unofficial mentor inside. "Ready for tomorrow, child?" Octavia asked. Her voice was raspy but full of authority. Zoraya nodded. "Mentally, I'm ready, Octavia. But what about the documents?" Octavia smiled mysteriously, reached into her pocket, and pulled out a small contraband USB drive. "My protégé, Zaire, has everything secured on the outside," Octavia whispered. "He's brilliant, like I was in my youth. He tracked the flow of funds from Cyprian's company. Cyprian was careless. He used a shell company in Panama to launder money from the projects, but he put his mother's name as director. Amateur." Zoraya's eyes shone with coldness. "And Azura's medical proof?" "Safe," Octavia replied. Zaire managed to get close to the nurse who attended to Azura. Turns out the nurse kept a copy of the original medical record that wasn't destroyed. Azura suffered a miscarriage 2 days before the stair incident due to an overdose of illegal diet pills. She was already bleeding when she left the house. Zoraya clenched her fists under the table. The truth was painful, but also liberating. She had never killed anyone. The guilt that had tormented her in the first months vanished without a trace, replaced by the embers of a vengeance burning bright. "Thank you, Octavia. I don't know how I can ever repay you." Zoraya's voice trembled. Octavia patted her hand. "Pay me by winning, Zoraya. Win for all of us, the ones silenced by arrogant men and a corrupt system. When you walk out of here, you will no longer be the naive Zoraya. You will be the CEO of your own life." Octavia leaned in. "Remember our strategy. Don't attack directly. Let them feel superior first. Let Cyprian think he still has control. When he lowers his guard, when he feels safe on his throne, then you pull the rug out from under his feet." "First step, asset freeze," Zoraya murmured, repeating the plan they had mapped out for months. "Exactly," Octavia nodded. "Based on your father's original will, the one you left in a safety deposit box at another bank, which luckily Cyprian didn't know about, you have absolute veto power. As soon as you get out and activate your status with the board of directors, every cent that leaves the company accounts will need your approval." Zoraya imagined Cyprian's face when his credit card was declined. A faint smile returned to her lips. "One more thing," Octavia added with a serious face. "Be careful. Cyprian is cunning, but Azura is reckless. Desperate people do crazy things." "I already died once. 2 years ago, Octavia," Zoraya replied calmly. "They can't kill someone who is already dead." On her last night, Zoraya couldn't sleep. She spent it packing her few belongings, some books, a toothbrush, a change of clothes she wore when she came in, and a small crumpled photo of her father. She distributed the rest of her soap, shampoo, and some food among her cellmates. An emotional atmosphere enveloped cell number 12. "Don't forget about us, huh, Zari?" said Ophelia, with teary eyes. "I won't," Zoraya promised. I'll come back. Not as an inmate, but as someone who will help with your case, Ophelia. At dawn, Zariah stood in front of the small cracked mirror above the sink. She contemplated her reflection. Her hair, once long and manicured, was now cut to shoulder length and somewhat coarse. Her skin wasn't as soft anymore. There was a hardness in her features. Her eyes, once soft and full of love, were now dark and deep like the ocean on a stormy night. She was no longer the sweet Mrs. Mercer. She was no longer Reginald Vance's spoiled girl. Prison had stripped her of all her naivety and weakness, leaving an indestructible steel core. She touched her chest. Her heart beat steadily, without fear. There was only sharp focus. Outside these walls, Cyprian and Azura were probably sleeping peacefully on a plush mattress bought with Zariah's father's money. Or maybe they were nervous thinking about the audit. They didn't know a storm was heading their way. They thought the Zariah walking out tomorrow would be a broken, ashamed, and poor woman. They thought they were picking up a wounded sheep. How wrong they were. The cell door would open in a few hours. Zariah put on her old white shirt, the only decent garment she had. The shirt now fit somewhat loosely on her thinner frame. She buttoned it up to her neck as if putting on armor. Zariah sat on the edge of the bed waiting for the sound of the key turning. She whispered a promise to herself, a promise that would fuel every one of her steps from that moment on. Cyprian, Azura, enjoy your luxury breakfast this morning, because it will be the last decent meal you'll be able to swallow in peace. The metallic sound of the lock resonated. The cell door opened. The hallway light spilled inside. The game had begun. The morning sun shone brightly in the prison's outer courtyard, as if wanting to burn away the sins locked behind the concrete walls. However, the heat of the sun was outmatched by the heat of the camera spotlights. Cyprian Mercer waited by the exit gate, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark blue Armani suit. Beside him, Azura, in a discreet ivory-white knee-length dress, her hair in an elegant bun, held a bouquet of white roses. They looked like a couple cut out of a Happy Family magazine. If you ignored the fact that they were waiting for Cyprian's ex-wife to get out of prison. "Do there have to be so many journalists?" Azura hissed under her breath, maintaining a stiff smile for the cameras. "There have to be," Cyprian replied without looking at her, briefly waving to the crowd of reporters. "We have to control the narrative from the first second she steps foot outside. The headline has to be, 'Faithful husband welcomes repentant wife,' not 'Ex-con seeks revenge.'" Cyprian glanced at his watch, valued at tens of thousands of dollars. His heart beat with unease. He hadn't slept all night thinking about the audit starting today. He needed Zariah's signature before lunch, or the bank would start freezing his operating lines of credit. "The door is opening!" shouted one of the photographers. The rumble of the old iron gate sliding open broke the tension. All lenses focused on the dark opening. Slowly, a figure appeared. Zariah Vance. She didn't walk with her head down, as shamed inmates usually do when released. She walked upright. Her steps were firm and measured. She wore a simple white shirt, slightly oversized, and faded jeans, the same clothes she wore when arrested 2 years ago. Her shoulder-length hair framed a face sharp and pale from lack of sun, without makeup, without jewelry. But something was different. Her eyes. Zariah's eyes scanned the crowd of journalists and stopped on Cyprian and Azura. There was no longing or sadness, not even explosive anger. Her gaze was empty, but sharp as the barrel of a rifle about to fire. Cyprian swallowed hard. He took a step forward, extending his arms with a moved expression he had rehearsed in front of the mirror. "Zariah, darling, finally!" Cyprian said loudly so the microphones would catch it. "Welcome back. We are here for you." Azura stepped forward behind Cyprian, offering the flowers with a trembling hand. "Sis, we've prepared your room at home. Let's start over, okay?" The cameras flashed frantically, capturing the moment of reconciliation. Zariah stopped 2 steps away from them. She looked at the white roses as if looking at a dead rat. Then she looked at Cyprian. The corner of her lips lifted slightly, forming a crooked, chilling smile. She said nothing. She simply took a step to the side, walking right past Cyprian as if he were a lamppost on her path. "Zoraya," Cyprian hissed, his voice turning sharp as he realized she was ignoring him. He grabbed her arm. "Don't make a scene. Get in the car now." The grip was strong, painful, but Zoraya didn't wince. She looked at Cyprian's hand on her arm, then at his eyes. "Let go of me," Zoraya said quietly. Her voice was raspy from disuse, but her coldness soaked right down to Cyprian's bones. "Or I scream in front of all these cameras that you are hurting me." Cyprian, surprised, let go of her arm by reflex. Zoraya resumed her march, leaving Cyprian and Azura standing there with ridiculous expressions and empty hands in the middle of a crowd of journalists who began to whisper in confusion. "Where is she going? She has no one," Azura said, panic setting in. Her voice started to rise, breaking the image of the elegant woman she had built. Zoraya kept walking toward the main road. Cyprian tried to follow her, but his steps were halted by the smooth roar of an engine approaching. A gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom pushed its way through the journalists. The car was ostentatiously luxurious, a stark contrast to the dust of the street in front of the prison. Its license plate wasn't just any plate. It indicated its owner had access and power. The car stopped right in front of Zoraya. A uniformed chauffeur got out quickly to open the rear door for her, but it wasn't the chauffeur that left Cyprian slack-jawed. What froze him was the figure of a young man in an impeccable suit who stepped out of the passenger side and bowed respectfully to Zoraya. Zaire Knox, the young Harvard-educated attorney, famous for winning impossible cases against giant corporations. Cyprian had tried to hire Zaire for his legal team last year, but was flatly rejected. What was Zaire doing here? For Zoraya? "Good morning, Mrs. Vance," Zaire greeted with a clear, respectful voice. "Following Ms. Graves' instructions, everything is ready." Zoraya nodded briefly. "Let's go, Zaire." Before getting into the luxury vehicle, she turned one last time. She saw Cyprian with his face flushed red with anger and embarrassment, and Azura staring in disbelief. Zoraya didn't wave. She simply got into the car, and the door closed with a solid, muffled thud, separating her world from theirs. The luxury car drove away, kicking up a cloud of dust that hit Cyprian's face. "Mr. Mercer! Mr. Mercer!" The journalists now surrounded Cyprian like sharks smelling blood. "Who picked up Mrs. Vance? Whose car is that? Is there a third person? Is the reconciliation canceled?" "No comment," barked Cyprian, losing control. He shoved a microphone away and pulled Azura's hand roughly. "Let's go." Inside his own luxury car, which now felt cramped and hot, Cyprian punched the steering wheel. "Who was the bastard who picked her up?" he shouted. "It's Zaire Knox, Cyprian." Azura's voice trembled with fear. "The expensive lawyer. Where did Zoraya get the money to hire him? Her accounts are empty. We checked." "I don't know." Cyprian started the engine abruptly. "But wherever she goes, we have to find her. I need that signature today." Meanwhile, in the silent, cool Rolls-Royce, Zoraya reclined her head on the soft leather seat. The scent of expensive leather and sandalwood air freshener replaced the rancid smell of the prison. "Where to, ma'am?" Zaire asked politely from the front seat, watching her in the rearview mirror. "To the sanctuary, Zaire," Zoraya replied, eyes closed. "I want a shower. I want to scrub off the remains of their contact." The sanctuary turned out to be a penthouse on the top floor of a 5-star hotel in downtown. This property was one of the many hidden assets of Zoraya's late father, not recorded in the company books Cyprian managed, but in a private trust fund that only Zoraya could access upon turning 30 or under certain emergency conditions. Her unjust imprisonment had triggered the emergency clause. Zoraya stood under the stream of hot water in the spacious marble bathroom. Steam filled the room. She scrubbed her skin with a rough sponge, as if wanting to tear off the layer of epidermis that had touched prison air, that had been touched by Cyprian. Finally, tears welled up, mixing with the water. It wasn't a cry of sadness, but of liberation. She wept for her 2 stolen years. She wept for her father, who couldn't see her free. She wept for the child she never carried in her womb, but whom she was accused of killing. After an hour, Zariah stepped out. On the king-sized bed was a selection of new clothes prepared by Zaire's team. In her size. No longer the pastel, feminine dresses Cyprian liked so Zariah would look like a submissive wife. The selection was bold, modern, and imposing. Structured blazers, high-waisted trousers, silk shirts in navy blue and black. The colors of power. Zariah chose a pristine white suit with an asymmetrical, elegant cut. White not as a symbol of purity, but as a blank canvas, or perhaps as the shroud for Cyprian's career. As she buttoned the jacket, Zaire knocked on the door and entered with a thick stack of documents. "Excuse the interruption, ma'am. The notary is already waiting in the living room. We need your signature for the total transfer of powers regarding your father's holding company." Zariah sat at the vanity, allowing a professional stylist, also arranged by Zaire, to cut her hair into a sharp bob that framed her determined features. "Read me the key points, Zaire," Zariah ordered, gazing at her new reflection in the mirror. Point 1. Zaire opened a blue folder. "The power of attorney you granted to Cyprian Mercer 3 years ago is revoked." Point 2. Your status as majority shareholder with 90% of the shares is activated. Point 3. All assets, both movable and immovable, in the name of the company or affiliated persons are frozen for forensic audit. "Proceed," Zariah said succinctly. "There is one more thing, ma'am." Zaire hesitated for a moment. "The bank has informed us that Mr. Mercer is requesting an emergency withdrawal of $1.2 million this very afternoon, using the deed to a property in Silver Lake Estates as collateral. The deed is in your name, but he possesses the old power of attorney." Zariah spun her chair to look at Zaire. Her face, now with light but firm makeup, looked formidable. "Let him request it," Zariah said coldly. "Let him feel victorious until the very last second, then cut off his access right when he's about to swallow the hook." Zariah stood up, stepping into blood-red stilettos. The sound of her steps on the marble floor resonated like the strike of a judge's gavel. "I'm done being the victim, Zaire. Now show them who the real owner of all the luxury they enjoy is." While Zariah plotted her war strategy, Cyprian was trying to bail water out of a sinking ship. At the headquarters of the Mercer Group, which ironically was located in a building owned by Zariah's father, Cyprian paced back and forth in the boardroom. In front of him, 3 main investors looked nervous after seeing the morning news. "Mr. Mercer," one of the investors cleared his throat, "the news this morning, your wife refused to come home with you. Will this affect the dispute over asset ownership? We heard the land for the Marbella project is still in her name." Cyprian laughed, a laugh too loud and forced. "Ah, Mr. Garrett, don't believe cheap gossip. My wife Zariah, well, 2 years in prison affected her mental health a bit. She was ashamed to face the media, so she left quietly in a car from the mental health clinic I hired. She needs time alone, so the assets are safe." "Safe 100%?" another investor insisted. 100%, Cyprian lied smoothly. "In fact, this very afternoon I'm signing the liquidation for fresh funds to accelerate our project. You have nothing to worry about. Zariah is an obedient wife. As soon as she calms down, she'll sign whatever I put in front of her." Azura entered the room with a tray of coffee, playing her role of efficient secretary again. She smiled sweetly at the investors, but her eyes betrayed panic when they met Cyprian's. When the investors left, appeased with promises, Azura smashed the tray against the table. "Are you crazy, Cyprian? Mental health clinic? What if the journalists investigate? We don't even know where she is." "Shut up, Azura," Cyprian barked. "I'm buying time. The bank just called. The verification for the $1.2 million withdrawal is in process. As soon as the money is in our account, we pay the suppliers, secure our position, and then we look for Zariah. If necessary, we'll hire some thugs to drag her home." Cyprian's phone pinged. A notification from the bank. Verification process in final phase. Cyprian sighed in relief. "See? The old power of attorney still works. Zariah is a fool. She didn't go straight to a notary upon leaving. She must be crying in some corner. "Tonight we have to celebrate, Cyprian," said Azura, starting to calm down. "To relax our nerves and to prove to the public we aren't worried. Let's dine at the Gilded Oak. Invite some friends from the club." "Good idea," Cyprian nodded, adjusting his tie. His confidence was slowly returning. He felt he still had control. He had always beaten weak Zaria. Why would this time be different? They didn't realize that across town, a courier was delivering a priority legal notice to that bank's headquarters. A notice with the letterhead of the law firm Knox and Associates, attaching a notarial deed signed just 5 minutes ago. The Gilded Oak restaurant buzzed that night with the city's elite. Crystal chandeliers shone warmly. Soft jazz floated in the atmosphere. Cyprian and Azura were seated at the best table in the center of the room. Azura wore a new evening gown she had bought that same afternoon. With the company credit card, of course. They were surrounded by 2 other couples, business partners they were trying to convince. "So it's true Zaria has mental problems?" asked Mrs. Sterling, a socialite fond of gossip. Azura put on a face of feigned sadness. "Yes, darling, it's a shame. This morning she didn't even recognize Cyprian. She was hallucinating. The doctor says she needs intensive treatment. We are very worried." "You are saints," praised Mrs. Sterling's husband. "Continuing to care for the woman who tried to kill your child." Cyprian smiled humbly, raising his wineglass. "Family is family, sir. I could never abandon Zaria. Let's toast to a better future." Glasses clinked. Cyprian felt victorious. The narrative had been controlled. The money would arrive tomorrow morning. Life was returning to normal. "Excuse me, sir." A waiter approached with a card machine in hand to charge for an extra bottle of Dom Perignon and the dinner bill. Cyprian pulled out his black platinum corporate card with a casual air. The card was linked directly to the main company account with an unlimited limit. "Go ahead," Cyprian said, without looking at the bill. The waiter inserted the card, waited a moment, then frowned. He tried again. "I'm sorry, sir. The card has been declined," the waiter whispered politely. Laughter at the table ceased. Cyprian's face flushed red. "Impossible. Try again. Maybe your machine is broken." The waiter tried again. A long, painful beep sounded. "Still declined, sir. The reason is contact issuer." "Use mine." Azura quickly pulled out her credit card, a supplementary card from the same account. The result was the same. Declined. Cold sweat began to run down Cyprian's back. The guests started looking at each other uncomfortably. "Maybe there's a problem with the bank's system." Cyprian tried to laugh, but it sounded hollow. "One moment, I'll call finance." Cyprian walked away from the table with trembling hands while dialing his CFO's number. "Hello, Mr. Reynolds. Why aren't the corporate cards working? Did you forget to pay the bill?" Cyprian barked in a whisper. On the other end of the line, Mr. Reynolds' voice sounded panicked and breathless. "Mr. Mercer, I was just about to call you. It's a disaster, sir. All company accounts have been frozen." "What do you mean frozen?" "An order just arrived from the SEC and the Federal Reserve. There is a total blocking instruction at the request of the new majority shareholder based on an asset embezzlement clause. And sir, the $1.2 million we requested this afternoon, the operation has been automatically canceled." Cyprian's world flipped upside down. "New majority shareholder? Who?" "Mrs. Zaria Vance, sir," replied Mr. Reynolds quietly. "Her notary just sent the act of change in company structure. You were removed as CEO at 5:00 p.m. this afternoon. All your access has been revoked." Cyprian dropped the phone. He turned toward the large window of the restaurant. Across the street, a giant screen that normally showed cosmetic ads suddenly changed. It was breaking news. On the screen, Zaria's face, beautiful, firm, and powerful, was giving a press conference at a podium. The volume of the TV at the restaurant bar was turned up by other customers. I, Zaria Vance, as the legitimate owner of the Vance Group, announced today a total restructuring of management. We have found evidence of massive embezzlement of funds over the last 2 years. Starting today, I assume total control and will take legal action against the parties who have harmed the company." On the screen, Zariah looked directly into the camera as if looking directly into Cyprian's eyes, who stood paralyzed inside the luxury restaurant, unable to pay his bill. Every eye in the restaurant focused on Cyprian and Azura. The whispers of admiration for the saintly family transformed into looks of contempt and mockery. Cyprian felt his knees go weak. It wasn't just a declined credit card, it was checkmate. And Zariah had just moved her first pawn. The next morning, the city woke up with an explosion. Not of a bomb, but of information that destroyed a reputation in seconds. In her penthouse, Zariah enjoyed a cup of chamomile tea while looking at her tablet. Zaire sat across from her, smiling with satisfaction. Trending topic number 1 on X, Instagram, and TikTok, Zaire reported. The hashtags #Truth4Zariah and #MercerScandal have already reached 2 million mentions in an hour. Zariah swiped her finger across the screen. An anonymous account managed by Zaire's investigative team had published an explosive file. It wasn't mere rumors. It was a high-resolution scan of the original medical record from Mercy General Hospital, dated September 23rd, 2 days before the stair incident that sent Zariah to prison. The document read clearly: Patient Azura Banks. Diagnosis: spontaneous incomplete abortion due to consumption of dangerous chemical substances. Dietary supplements. Procedure: emergency D&C, September 23rd, 11:45 p.m. The document proved that when Azura fell down the stairs on September 25th, her uterus was already empty. There was no baby that Zariah had killed. Only the drama of a manipulative woman who used her own miscarriage to get rid of the legitimate wife. Across town, in the luxury villa that used to belong to Zariah, the atmosphere was tense. Cyprian smashed his phone against the wall, shattering the screen. His breathing was ragged. His red-rimmed eyes stared at Azura, who was curled up on the sofa, her face pale as wax. "Explain it to me." Cyprian's voice was low, trembling with rage, about to explode. "Explain to me why that medical record says you miscarried 2 days before Zariah came to the office." It's fake, Cyprian. Zariah forged it." Azura tried to deny, but her voice cracked. "Don't lie to me anymore," Cyprian shouted, approaching and grabbing her by the shoulders. "I just called the hospital director. He's terrified. He says the file is authentic and was stolen by an intern nurse. So it's true. You had already miscarried because of your damn diet pills. And then you faked a fall so Zariah would go to prison?" Azura broke down crying hysterically. "I was scared, Cyprian. At that moment you said if I wasn't pregnant you would divorce Zariah, but I had the miscarriage. I was afraid you would leave me if you knew the baby was lost. Then Zariah arrived furious. I saw an opportunity. I thought if Zariah went to prison, we could be happy forever." Cyprian let her go, backing away as if he had just touched something infectious. The betrayal left him speechless. For 2 years he had lived convinced he was doing the right thing for justice for his dead son. That conviction justified all his cruelty toward Zariah. But it turned out he was just a pawn in Azura's twisted game. He had imprisoned his loyal wife for a liar. "Cyprian, we have to deny it. Let's hire a lawyer. Let's pay influencers," Azura pleaded, crawling to hug his legs. "With what money?" Cyprian shouted in frustration. "My accounts are frozen, Azura. My cards don't work, and now the whole world knows you are a liar, and I am the idiot husband who jailed his innocent wife." The insistent ringing of the doorbell interrupted their argument. It wasn't a guest's ring, but a long, demanding one. Cyprian looked at the security monitor. In front of the high gate of the house were 2 police cars, a moving truck, and in the middle of it all, the figure that froze his blood. Zariah had come. The automatic gate opened, not because Cyprian pressed the button, but because Zariah's team had hacked the security system. Zariah walked into the garden of her childhood home. The modern colonial-style house, with its majestic white pillars, looked the same, but the vibe was different. The grass was too perfect. There were tacky new statues in the garden, undoubtedly Azura's taste. Behind Zariah walked Zaire, 4 police officers and 2 court officials. The main door opened abruptly. Cyprian came out with a distraught face, followed by Azura, who was still sobbing. "What the hell is this, Zariah?" Cyprian shouted, trying to maintain the remains of his authority in front of the police. "You can't just walk in like this. This is still my house." Zariah stopped on the first step of the porch. She looked at Cyprian from a lower position, but somehow Cyprian felt tiny. "Your house?" Zariah asked quietly. She turned to Zaire. "Zaire, please read property certificate number 405 and the deed of donation from the year 2018. Zaire opened his leather folder. "The land and building are registered in the name of Zariah Vance. Absolute donation from Mr. Reginald Vance. There is no marital property clause, as it was acquired before the marriage and has separate property status. Based on this morning's provisional court order, the legitimate owner requests immediate eviction from the property, as the current occupants have no residency permission." Cyprian's face turned ashen. "But I'm your husband. It's our house." "Soon-to-be ex-husband," Zariah corrected coldly. "And I correct you, Cyprian. It's my house. You've just been a guest who stayed too long and started stealing the silverware." Zariah signaled the officials. "Take their things out. Only clothes and personal items. All furniture, paintings, electronics, and jewelry purchased with company money stay here for the audit." "You can't do this!" Azura screamed. She tried to lunge at Zariah, but a female police officer stopped her firmly. "I am the lady of this house." Zariah looked at Azura with a gaze that froze blood. "You are no lady, Azura. You are just a parasite that attached itself to the wrong host," Zariah said. "You have 30 minutes to pack your bags, or I'll have my men throw them in the street." "Zariah." Cyprian looked at her, searching for some trace of the sweet woman he once knew. The woman who always made his coffee in the morning, who massaged his feet when he was tired. That woman was dead. "Zariah," Cyprian's voice softened, his last attempt at manipulation. "We can talk about this calmly inside, not in front of the police. Zari, I know I was wrong, but Azura deceived me with the pregnancy. I am a victim too, Zari." Zariah laughed. A short, empty laugh. "Victim?" Zariah took a step forward, bringing her face close to Cyprian's. "You aren't a victim, Cyprian. You are a greedy man who preferred to believe his mistress over the wife who stood by your side for 10 years. You aren't sorry Azura lied. You are sorry you got caught." She turned around, giving them her back. "You have 25 minutes left. For every minute you delay, one of your suitcases gets burned." Cyprian and Azura had no choice. Under police supervision, they ran to their bedroom, stuffing clothes into suitcases in a panic. Cyprian tried to grab his Rolex from a drawer, but an official stopped him. "Sorry, sir. It's registered as a company asset from last year, confiscated." Half an hour later, Cyprian and Azura were on the sidewalk, outside the gate. 2 large suitcases and several handbags lay at their feet. The gate closed slowly in front of them. Neighbors started coming out to witness the drama, whispering. Cyprian Mercer, the successful CEO, was now on the street like an elite vagrant. From the master bedroom window on the 2nd floor, Zariah watched them. She didn't feel happy. She just felt clean. The house could finally breathe again. The next day, the battlefield moved to Vance Tower, a 40-story skyscraper in the financial district. At 9:00 a.m., the main boardroom on the top floor was full with the board of directors and minority shareholders. The atmosphere was tense. The coffee served remained untouched. The double doors opened. Zariah Vance entered, flanked by Zaire and Octavia Graves, who was now on parole and had joined as Zariah's chief legal advisor. Zariah wore a jet-black suit. Her bob cut was perfectly styled. She walked to the chair at the head of the table, the chair Cyprian had occupied for 2 years. She sat down, resting her hands on the marble table. "Good morning," she greeted. Her voice was calm, but it commanded the room. "Apologies for the chaos of the last 2 days. We are here to take out the trash." Suddenly, the room door was forced open. Cyprian burst in, dodging security, trying to stop him. He was still wearing the wrinkled suit from the day before. "I am still the legitimate CEO of this company," Cyprian shouted breathlessly. "This meeting is invalid without my presence. I built this company for the last 2 years while she was in prison." "Built?" Zariah arched an eyebrow. She pressed a button on the projector remote. A graph appeared on the giant screen, a red line plummeting. "During your 2 years of leadership, Cyprian," Zariah began her presentation as if Cyprian were an incompetent intern, "net profits fell 40%, short-term debt increased 200%, and most interestingly," Zariah pressed another button. A list of suspicious transactions appeared. There was a flow of funds of $1 million to a company called Lux Interiors LLC, a shell company owned by Azura Banks. "What is this for? Interior consulting services?" Zariah read with a mocking tone. "What interior design costs $1 million? Remodeling hell?" The shareholders murmured uneasily. Cyprian's face paled. He knew those funds. It was the money he had used to buy Azura an apartment and a luxury car without it being traced as a personal asset. It was a business diversification strategy. Cyprian tried to excuse himself, but his voice was weak. "It's embezzlement, Cyprian." Octavia cut him off abruptly. "Title 18 U.S. Code, and since you did it in the exercise of your office, the penalty is aggravated." Zariah stood up. "As holder of 90% of the voting shares, I exercise my right. The only item on the agenda is the dismissal of Cyprian Mercer as CEO with dishonorable character and the filing of a lawsuit for damages for all company losses." "Agreed," exclaimed one of the oldest board members who had long hated Cyprian's arrogant leadership style. "Agreed," the others chorused. Cyprian stood paralyzed in the middle of the room. He looked around, searching for an ally, but the people who used to flatter him, who laughed with him while playing golf, now looked away. In the business world, there are no eternal friends, only interests, and Cyprian no longer had any value. "Security," Zariah called calmly. "Please escort Mr. Mercer out and make sure he takes nothing but the remains of his dignity, if he has any left." 2 burly security guards grabbed Cyprian's arms. He resisted weakly, his gaze fixed on Zariah. "You are cruel, Zari," Cyprian whispered. "I learned from the best," Zariah replied without blinking. The door closed. Cyprian was expelled from his own kingdom. Inside, Zariah sat back down. "All right, gentlemen, let's talk about how we are going to save this ship," Zariah said, opening a new chapter for her father's company. Room 204 of the Crossroad Motel was small. It smelled of stale tobacco, and the air conditioner made a noise like an old tractor. Cyprian sat on the edge of the bed, whose springs dug into him, staring at the peeling wall. His luxury suitcases with designer clothes were piled up ridiculously in that filthy room. It had been 3 days since they were kicked out. The credit cards didn't work. The cash Cyprian had left in his wallet was barely $300, a pittance for someone who used to spend that on a single dinner. His Cadillac had been repossessed by the financing company yesterday afternoon. Turns out Cyprian hadn't paid the installments for 3 months. The money had been diverted to cover Azura's lifestyle. "It's so hot in here. I can't sleep," complained Azura. She had just come out of the bathroom, whose faucet was dripping. "Stop complaining," Cyprian muttered without turning around. "Stop complaining!" Azura exploded. She threw a wet towel at Cyprian's face. "This is all your fault. You said you were a business genius. You said Zariah's assets were under your control. And what happened? You are just a puppet. Without Zariah's signature, you have nothing." Cyprian shoved the towel away roughly, stood up, and pushed Azura against the cheap wooden wardrobe. My fault? Cyprian shouted, eyes bloodshot. Do you have a mirror? All of this fell apart because of your lie, Azura. If you hadn't faked the fall, if you hadn't staged that dirty theater, Zariah wouldn't have gone to prison. We probably would have divorced amicably. I would have gotten part of the marital assets, and we would still be rich. But no, you were greedy. You wanted to see her destroyed. And now look who is destroyed. I did it for us, Azura replied, shouting through tears. I love you, you idiot. Love, Cyprian laughed bitterly. You loved my credit card. You loved the status of Mrs. Mercer. Now that I have nothing, do you still love me? Azura fell silent. Her eyes shifted nervously, avoiding Cyprian's gaze. The painful silence filled the room. Azura's unspoken answer was more hurtful than a slap. I knew it, he hissed. Cyprian sat back down, burying his face in his hands. Cyprian. Azura's voice changed, becoming calculating. We can sell my jewelry. My handbags still have value. We can flee abroad, to Mexico or Canada. They withheld our passports, Azura, Cyprian said wearily. A friend in the police told me. Zariah moved fast. We are under surveillance, waiting for the summons. Azura collapsed onto the floor. Her face was pale. The image of jail, the place she laughed at when visiting Zariah, now tormented her. She imagined a narrow cell, rancid food, and a cold floor. I don't want to go to jail, Cyprian, she sobbed. Do something. Call Zariah. Ask for forgiveness. She loved you. She was a fool in love. Surely there is a way. She is no longer a fool, Cyprian replied, staring blankly out the barred window. She is a monster that we created ourselves. The sound of a police siren was heard in the distance. To both of them, it sounded like a funeral bell approaching. The offices of Knox and Associates were a hive of activity. Stacks of documents piled up on the conference table. Zariah signed the last sheet of a 2-inch thick file. Here it is, said Zaire, closing the red folder. The request for review of the sentence before the Supreme Court. The new evidence, the novum, is very solid. The original medical record, the testimony of the nurse, who finally decided to speak out for fear of being implicated, and the missing security camera footage, of which the former head of security kept a copy, Octavia added, sipping her coffee. Yes, Zariah had located the head of security. Turns out Cyprian fired him without severance a week after the incident. Resentful, the man kept a copy of the hard drive as life insurance. In the footage, it was clearly seen. Zariah and Azura were 6 feet apart. Azura looked at the camera and then deliberately let herself fall with the technique of an amateur stuntman. With this evidence, Zaire continued, your conviction will be annulled. The state must restore your good name, and history will record that you were never guilty. That is for the past, Zariah said calmly. Now for the future. Zaire handed her a second black folder. Police complaint number LPB 0981-205, Zaire read. Defendants, Cyprian Mercer and Azura Banks. Charges, perjury, false accusation, falsification of annual accounts, and money laundering. Accumulated penalty? Zaria asked. For Cyprian, with embezzlement and laundering, it could reach 15 years, Octavia replied. For Azura, as the mastermind of the plot that sent an innocent person to prison, the judges will be very severe. Maybe between 7 and 9 years. Zariah looked at her signature on the letterhead paper. The black ink was still fresh. Once, she signed the marriage license with a hand trembling with happiness. Now, she signed the death sentence for her ex-husband's life with a steady hand. Send it, Zariah ordered. Now? Zaire asked. Now, Zariah replied. I want them to receive it while eating instant noodles in that filthy motel. I want them to choke on reality. Zaire nodded and handed the file to his assistant to take to the precinct. Zariah approached the office window overlooking the city skyline. The sky was cloudy, but to her it looked clear. Justice is slow, Octavia, Zariah murmured. Octavia stood beside her, wrapping an arm around her student and client's shoulders. It is slow, child, but it has a very cruel sense of humor. When it arrives, it hits where it hurts the most. Zariah smiled slightly. They took 2 years from me. I will take the rest of their lives. Zariah's phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Zariah, help me. Cyprian hit me. I want to be a protected witness. I have more evidence about the bribe to the judge Cyprian made. Meet with me. Azura. Zariah showed the message to Octavia and Zaire. As you suspected, Octavia, Zariah said coldly. The rats start eating each other when the ship sinks. What are you going to reply? Octavia asked. Zariah typed a brief response and turned off the phone. Zariah's reply. Save your story for the police. I don't care. A torrential rain fell over the city that afternoon, as if the sky were crying or perhaps cleansing the sins of the metropolis. In the lobby of Vance Tower, the atmosphere was silent, despite it being rush hour. Employees who normally hurried now walked slowly. Their gazes were pinned on a spot in the middle of the grand marble lobby. There, on his knees, was a man they once feared and respected. Cyprian Mercer, with his shirt misbuttoned and hair disheveled, was kneeling on the floor. He didn't care about the whispers of the employees he once shouted at, nor the security guards looking at him with a mix of pity and disgust. His gaze was only fixed on the VIP elevator door, which had just opened. Zariah walked out. The sound of her stilettos resonated. Clack, 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 rhythmic as the ticking of a death clock. She wore a black trench coat, elegant and untouchable. Beside her, Zaire was alert, but Zariah raised a hand indicating for him to stay back. Cyprian dragged himself on his knees toward her. Zariah! Cyprian's voice was hoarse, broken by held-back crying. Zariah, help me! They are looking for me! The police are outside! Zariah stopped 6 feet from Cyprian. She looked at her ex-husband, not with anger, but with the look of a scientist observing a dying insect. Stand up, Cyprian, Zariah said with a flat voice. You are in the way. Forgive me, Zari. I was wrong. I was stupid. Cyprian prostrated himself, his forehead touching the cold marble. That woman bewitched me. Azura planned everything. She forced me to bribe the judge. She forged the evidence. I still love you, Zariah. Remember our 10 years of marriage. Remember when we started from scratch. Zariah laughed softly, a cold and piercing laugh. Started from scratch? She repeated. Correction, Cyprian. I started from scratch. You were just the handsome passenger. And about love? You don't love me. You miss my credit card. You miss the power of my signature. You miss the security I gave you. No, I swear to God. Don't bring God into this. Zariah cut him off abruptly. She crouched down a bit so her eyes were level with Cyprian's red ones. 2 years ago, when I knelt at your feet, begging you to believe me when I said I hadn't pushed Azura. What did you do? Did you push me away? Did you spit in my face and let the police drag me out? Cyprian remained silent. His body trembled violently. The memory hit him. Now, Zariah whispered, you are feeling 1,000th of my despair back then. Enjoy it. It's my parting gift. Zariah stood up and addressed the head of security. Mr. Garcia, please clean up this trash and allow the police officers outside to enter. Zariah, no! Zariah! Cyprian tried to grab her leg, but 2 guards held him firmly. From the revolving door of the lobby, 4 uniformed police officers entered with handcuffs in hand. Cyprian Mercer, a police officer said firmly, you are under arrest for alleged crimes of money laundering, embezzlement, and perjury. Click. The sound of the handcuffs closing. Zariah didn't turn back. She walked toward her car waiting for her, leaving Cyprian behind as he was dragged out, accompanied by the flashes of journalists' cameras waiting at the door. The interrogation room at the precinct was cold and smelled of stale coffee. On one side of the metal table, Azura Banks sat with trembling hands, holding a plastic cup. Her face, usually radiant, was now dull. Her eyes were puffy. Opposite her, a seasoned detective stared at her, while Zaire, present as the lawyer for the complainant, watched from behind a one-way mirror in the adjoining room. Ms. Banks, said the detective, The medical proof is conclusive. You faked a pregnancy and a miscarriage to send Mrs. Vance to prison. The penalty is 7 years, but you could get a reduction if you cooperate to uncover a bigger case." Azura swallowed hard. She knew it was her only way out. Cyprian was finished. It made no sense to be loyal to a sinking ship. "What guarantee do I have, Detective?" she asked quietly. "We will propose you as a cooperating witness to the DA. Your sentence will be reduced," the detective replied. "We need proof of Cyprian's involvement in bribing the judge at the trial 2 years ago." Azura took a deep breath and rummaged through her purse, which had been confiscated, but she was allowed to access its contents. She pulled out a small pink USB drive. "Cyprian thinks he's so smart," Azura said, her voice starting to sound bitter and vengeful. "He deleted all chats and emails, but he forgot something. I handled the transfers. I always made backups of everything as insurance for my future." The detective took the drive and plugged it into a laptop. The screen showed a series of cryptocurrency transfers and phone call recordings. Cyprian's voice. Recording. "Listen, the judge needs another $100K for the sentence to be the maximum. Take it from the company marketing funds. Zariah has to be in jail for at least 2 years to give me time to transfer the Silver Lake land." Azura's voice recording. "But that's risky, baby," Cyprian's voice. "Just do it. Or do you want us to end up poor? As soon as she enters the cell, we'll be the king and queen." Behind the mirror, Zariah, who had just entered, stood paralyzed. She suspected Cyprian was evil, but hearing her ex-husband directly plan her destruction with such coldness was still painful. "Bastard!" Zaire hissed beside her. In the interrogation room, Azura continued her betrayal. "And it's not just that, Detective," Azura added, eyes shining with malice. "Cyprian also ordered someone to cut the brakes on Zariah's former lawyer's car so he couldn't attend the first appeal hearing. I have the chats with the thug he hired." The detective was stunned. The case was expanding from domestic fraud to organized crime and attempted murder. "Enough," said the detective, closing the laptop. "This is enough for Cyprian to rot in jail for life." Azura smiled in relief, thinking she had saved herself. "Thank you for your cooperation, Ms. Banks," the detective said coldly. "Your status is now officially that of detained and charged. We will submit your request for cooperation, but remember, you remain the mastermind of the fake miscarriage. Do not expect to walk free." Azura's smile faded. But I helped." "Helping uncover another crime doesn't erase yours," sentenced the detective. "Take her to holding." As they led Azura out, she crossed paths with Cyprian, who was being led to the room next door. Their gazes met. There was no love, only the pure hatred of two predators devouring each other. 3 months later at the Superior Court, the room was packed. The case had become the trial of the year. Society, outraged by the injustice suffered by Zariah, filled the surroundings of the courthouse with signs of support. Zariah sat in the front row. She seemed calm, dressed completely in white. Beside her, Octavia squeezed her hand tightly. The presiding judge, not the same one as before, the previous one had been removed and was now also accused, banged the gavel to begin the reading of the sentence. Cyprian and Azura sat in the defendant's dock, separated by 2 police officers. Cyprian looked haggard, his hair had turned gray, his eyes were sunken. Azura kept her head down, crying silently. "The court is ready to rule." The judge's voice boomed. Zariah's heart pounded. The moment of truth. The defendant, Cyprian Mercer, is found guilty of the crimes of bribery, money laundering, and fraud causing harm to third parties. The judge took a deep breath. The defendant is sentenced to 15 years in prison and a fine of $3 million. The room erupted in murmurs. Cyprian slumped in his chair as if his spine had been ripped out. 15 years. He would come out at 50, without money, without family, an old ex-con. "And the defendant, Azura Banks," continued the judge. Azura looked up, hoping her status as a collaborator would help her. "Guilty of the crimes of perjury and false accusation, resulting in the deprivation of liberty of a person. Although the defendant has acted as a cooperating witness, considering her active role and malicious intent as the initiator of the deception, the defendant is sentenced to 6 years in prison. Azura screamed hysterically. "No, it's not fair! It was Cyprian who forced me! 6 years?" "Get her out of here," ordered the judge. Cyprian didn't scream. He only turned to look for Zoraya in the crowd. Zoraya didn't look away. She looked him directly in the eyes and nodded slowly. Period. A final, full stop. As they took Cyprian through a side door, he saw Zoraya standing, surrounded by camera flashes, smiling. Smiling for real for the first time in 3 years. Cyprian realized it was the last time he would see the sunlight of freedom. A year later, Zoraya stood on a large plot of land on the outskirts of the city. Behind her, a new, pleasant, and modern building had just been finished. A sign at the entrance read, "The Zoraya Vance Foundation, Center for Legal Aid and Women's Empowerment." "It is beautiful, ma'am," said Zaire, standing beside her. Zaire was no longer just her lawyer, but also the director of operations for the foundation. "This is just the beginning, Zaire," Zoraya replied, smiling. "This building will be the home for voiceless women. Women like me, silenced by the system and their partners." Zoraya had sold the Mercer Group. She wanted nothing to do with a real estate business full of bad memories of Cyprian. With the money from the sale, plus Cyprian's assets the state returned to her as compensation, she built the foundation and invested in green technologies, a quieter sector. The name Zoraya Vance was now known as that of a philanthropist and activist, not as Cyprian's ex-wife or a victim. She had rewritten her own identity. That afternoon, Zoraya went to the cemetery. She placed a bouquet of lilies on her father's grave. "Dad," Zoraya whispered, caressing the headstone, "it's all over. Your fortune has returned and is being used for good. Our name is clean." A soft breeze blew, rustling the leaves of the trees. Zoraya felt peace. The vengeance that once burned in her chest had extinguished, replaced by a broad, serene relief. She no longer lived to destroy Cyprian. She lived for herself. Her phone rang. A calendar reminder. Monthly visit. Zoraya smirked. There was one last thing she had to do to close the loop perfectly. State Correctional Facility. The atmosphere in the visitation room was noisy, but to Zoraya, it felt silent. She sat on a cold metal chair, separated by thick glass and bars. A familiar position, but now the roles were reversed. The door opposite opened. Cyprian entered, escorted by an officer. His appearance was pitiful. He had only been in prison for a year, but he looked 10 years older. His head was shaved to the scalp due to lice. His face was rough and dark, a scar on his temple, probably from a fight. His aura of arrogance had disappeared, replaced by the pleading look of a beaten dog. Cyprian sat down. He looked at Zoraya with watery eyes, as if seeing a savior angel. He picked up the intercom receiver with trembling hands. Zoraya picked hers up calmly. "Zoraya." Cyprian's voice sounded distorted in Zoraya's ear. "Thank you for coming. I knew you would come. You still care about me, right?" Zoraya remained silent, letting Cyprian speak. "This is hell, Zari." Cyprian began to cry. "They beat me. The food is garbage. I can't take it anymore. Zari, please help me. File an appeal. You have contacts now. Or at least send me money. My commissary account is at 0. I'm starving." Zoraya looked at this man, the man she once adored, the man who threw her into a place like this without remorse. "I didn't come to save you, Cyprian." Zoraya's voice was clear and calm. Then, Cyprian was stunned. Zoraya took a brown envelope from her bag and pressed it against the glass. "This is a copy of our divorce decree, now final, and the Asset Liquidation Act. The court has decided that since you were the cause of the divorce and committed a felony against your spouse, you do not receive a single cent." Cyprian's face crumbled. The hope for money vanished. "And one more thing," Zoraya continued. "I came to return this." Zoraya pulled out the white gold wedding ring Cyprian had given her. the ring she had kept in the deepest drawer. "The officer will give it to you later," Zariah said. "Sell it. Maybe it will give you enough to buy tobacco and noodles for a month at the commissary." "Zariah, don't do this!" Cyprian sobbed. "I am your husband. I'm sorry." Zariah stood up, adjusting her jacket. "Before, you used to come visit me every month, expecting me to break and surrender," Zariah said, staring into Cyprian's eyes through the glass. "Today, I came to make sure you see that I am whole, happy, and that I won." "Zariah, wait! When will you come back?" Cyprian shouted desperately, as Zariah began to turn around. "Don't leave me alone, Zariah!" Zariah stopped for a moment and turned slightly. "There will be no more visits, Cyprian. This is the last one. Enjoy the rest of your life in the box you built yourself." Zariah hung up the phone. The connection cut off behind the glass. Cyprian screamed soundlessly, banging on the glass, begging, crying. But Zariah was already gone. The heavy iron door opened, letting the brilliant sunlight welcome her. She took a deep breath, inhaling the true air of freedom. No burdens, no past. Zariah walked toward her car, where Zaire waited with a smile. She got in, and the vehicle drove away slowly, leaving the gloomy prison building further and further behind, until it became a small dot that finally disappeared in the rear-view mirror. The flower had fully bloomed, and the iron bars had only been the fertilizer that made it stronger. Did you like the story, and which city are you listening from? Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story with love and respect.